Okay. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the 2021 Law and Media Workshop. And the title of our workshop tonight is When Journalists Investigate, How to Navigate a Story with High Stakes and Deep Consequences. And we're very pleased to welcome people from all over BC tonight. Usually this workshop is held at the Law Society office. I'm told that we have almost 100 people registered and even participant from all the way from Thunder Bay as well. My name's Vinnie Ewan, and I'm a communications officer at the Law Society of British Columbia. If you've sent a media inquiry to the Law Society in the last few years, you probably heard back from me. And I'm going to be tonight's moderator. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge that I am speaking to you from the traditional lands of the Coast Salish people, in particular the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. This is the first time that we're conducting this workshop entirely virtually. So that's very exciting. This workshop is an annual event that is a partnership between the Law Society and the Jack Webster Foundation, and we've been putting this on since 1994. As journalists, you're probably all very familiar with the work of Jack Webster, and you've probably attended the awards dinner in the past. You may or may not be as familiar with the Law Society's role. So the Law Society is the regulatory body for lawyers in British Columbia, and our role is to protect the public. We set and enforce professional standards for lawyers, and we also bring a voice to some of the issues affecting the justice system and the delivery of legal services in British Columbia. We're governed by a board of governors called benchers. 25 benchers are lawyers, and they're elected by other lawyers in all around BC. 6 benchers are public appointees, and they're appointed by the Lieutenant Governor and Council to bring their expertise. They bring their expertise not only to the decisions that our board makes, but also to our disciplinary hearing panels and some of our committees as well. And Jack Webster served as one of the very first publicly appointed benchers at the Law Society, and his legacy continues with the Jack Webster Foundation today. So right now, I'd just like to invite Janet Mitchell, Executive Director of the Jack Webster Foundation, to speak.
Hi, everyone. Great that you could join us tonight. On behalf of the Jack Webster Foundation and our board, we are so delighted to be able to offer free educational seminars to journalists, journalism educators, journalism students, and not only from all over BC, as Vinnie said, but the internet knows no boundaries and thus further afield. Welcome. Thank you so much. We also really hope to be able to offer more of these opportunities to you in the future. So stand by to hear from us a bit more on that front as well. A huge thanks tonight to your mastermind and ringleader, Dan Burnett, who has put all of this together, volunteered his time to do so. And also a massive thank you to Cassidy, Farid, and John, also your volunteers tonight, helping you to make sure that educational opportunities are available, like I said, across the province and further afield when it comes to journalism and all aspects of journalism as well. So thanks so much. Thanks also to the Law Society for helping make this happen. And let's get the show on the road.
Thank you so much, Janet. So now we're going to move on to introducing you to our panelists. So we're going to be looking at an unfolding scenario tonight, and along the way, our panelists are going to weigh in with their insights. So I'm pleased to introduce you to, first and foremost, Dan Burnett QC. He heads Owen Bird Law Corporation. He's a leading lawyer in defamation and media law, and he's taken some of his cases all the way up to the Supreme Court of Canada. He was called to the bar in 1988, and he also teaches media law at UBC. Our second panelist for tonight is John Daly. He's an investigative reporter and is currently host of Daly Back on the Beat on AM980 CKNW. He has worked as a journalist in print, radio, online, and TV reporting for 44 years, assigning, producing series, mini docs, and news shows. He's covered elections, evacuations, serial killers, gang crime, cops, corruption, the courts, and more. And our next panelist is Cassidy Olivier. He's been part of BC's media landscape since 2006. He cut his teeth as a crime reporter in Kamloops before moving back to Vancouver to work as a general assignments reporter and later the politics reporter at the province. He's been the city editor of the Vancouver Sun and Province newsroom since 2016. And last but not least, we have Farid Muttalib, who is an in-house lawyer with CBC Radio Canada since 2018. And as a member of CBC's media law group, he provides advice to journalists across the country. And before joining the CBC, he worked as a lawyer in private practice in Montreal. Special thank you to all of our panelists for being here tonight. And before we start, we just have a few housekeeping details. This workshop, as you know, it's being recorded if you weren't here at the beginning of the workshop. And later on, it'll be posted on our YouTube channel and our website. As we progress through the scenario, please feel free to type your questions into the chat box and I will bring them up to the panelists to answer your questions. And please note that your mics will be on mute throughout the workshop. So if you do have a question, please type it into the chat and we can get started with our scenario.
Okay, thanks, Vinny. I'll take that as my cue. We like to make things a little bit immersive with our seminars and have a bit of a story to it. When this one was first conceived of pre-COVID, my vision was to have everybody in the room discover a brown envelope under their chair. So I hear there's been an electronic version of that. If some people, maybe everybody may have received some kind of a special tip email, but I'm going to share screen and we're going to get started. So where this scenario starts is I was going to have a whole conspiracy wall behind me with the orange threads and pictures, but we've got a bit of a mystery, like all good big stories are. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce slides, and Vinny will help introduce them to everybody, give a chance to absorb, and we will then get some pearls of wisdom from our panel as we go. Go ahead, Vinny.
Yeah. Okay, so we have received a tip. An anonymous emailer claims that he knows who took Bobby Dunn from PNE 22 years ago. And so that's the missing child's picture on a milk carton from 22 years ago.
Okay, and just to help further set this thing up, everyone would think the obvious thing to do if you got a tip like that would be to get a hold of the tipster and in the world of Zoom, do an interview. So our intrepid reporter, Mashal Butt, has done just that. It was the first off the gate, and let's see what the tipster has to say.
Hi. Thanks for talking to me. I was wondering, how do you know who took Bobby Dunn?
Well, I used to work with a guy way back in the 90s. We had a moving company. He had this cube truck, and it was all a bit shady. We would like case the place and steal some stuff. Anyways, one day at the end of a shift, we were sharing a bottle of whiskey, and he got kind of drunk, and then he said, "Hey, I adopted a son." And he got all emotional, said it was like the happiest day of his life. So then the next day I saw him, he gets all serious and tells me I'm not supposed to tell anybody. So I didn't say anything.
What makes you think it was Bobby Dunn?
Well, a day or so later, it's all over the news about that kid who got went missing from the PNE. And then the guy that I was working with, gone, like a ghost. Went over to his place, it was cleared out, couldn't reach him on the phone. So I put two and two together and thought, oh boy. Then 22 years later, like just last week, I got a call from him.
Why didn't you go to the police?
Yeah, I know. What a scumbag, eh? I thought about it, I thought even when there was like a reward, I was thinking maybe I should turn him in, but I didn't really want police looking too closely at the stuff I was up to back then. And plus this guy could be pretty violent actually. So I just didn't want anything to do with cops. I still don't.
But this guy, he reached out to you recently, right?
Yeah, I couldn't believe it. He said he's living near Sumas and he's coming to Vancouver soon and he's thinking about old times and wanted to get together for a drink. I said, sure. He was going to call me when he got to the city.
So then what happened?
Well, we never did get together because the next thing, which was like last night, I saw him on the news. That car accident on the Portman Bridge where the one guy went all road rage and beat the shit out of the other guy. Well, the one they arrested, that's him. So I guess he's in lockup now.
Oh, really? I just saw that story. That's him? Can you tell me his name?
Yeah, he went by Jack. I guess his real name is John Barker. But seriously, you can never say that you got that name from me. And look, I'm getting kind of nervous now. That's all I know, and I'm going to be hanging out.
Oh no, just wait. I have a couple of more questions.
Okay, well, we've got the setup and we've got some backstory, but before I start asking our panel about it, what I'd like to do is get our audience engaged a little bit with a plan here. Actually, I'm just not seeing my Zoom poll control here. Oh, here we go. So right off the bat, I mean, what do? Do you take that straight to police? This Bobby Dunn might be found. Do you go straight to breaking a story with this huge scoop? Or do you do a little more investigating? So I'm going to start a poll. I'm going to let it go for just 40 seconds or so, and then we're going to see what happens.
People are really excited. They're already putting their answers into the chat.
Oh boy.
You can also, do the poll, use the poll buttons as well.
Yeah, poll buttons will give us our little graph when I reveal the results. I'll give it another 15 seconds or so. We have an engaged audience here. I can see the numbers coming in. Okay, 5 more seconds if you want to get a vote in on the poll.
Somebody said the anonymity of the vote has been compromised.
Oh, okay, now look at our results. Nobody was going to break the story now. I can't believe that. No, I can totally believe that. We don't know anything enough yet. And but there's some people who would take it straight to the police, and I can understand that. Although the vast majority would investigate more. So what I want to do, I'm going to just take that off screen now. And what I'd like to do is actually throw it over to Cassidy, maybe to start with, if you don't mind. I'm just curious from a experienced journalist point of view and somebody assigning. I mean, at this point, how much of a consideration is it to go straight to police, or is it you just don't know enough? What are you thinking?
I would definitely start thinking about that, but I think we would need to investigate more. I would start building a file on John Barker, trying to find out as much as we could about him through all the regular searches. And then I would go back and start looking and developing a file on the missing child as well, the Bobby Dunn file. I'm sure we would have a lot of the information at our fingertips through old stories, see if any of the reporters in-house had actually done some of the reporting on that story as well, and just start building kind of, file, start list of questions that we might want to ask.
Okay. Well, let me turn it over to John a little bit, because you got, a wealth of experience as well. And what sort of potential sources of information are you thinking about, John, at this point?
Okay, I hope you can hear me.
Yeah.
Good. All right. So, number one, I think your nearest and dearest event is this road rage incident. So, you're going to get on the Portman Freeway Patrol or whatever other cops are involved in this thing and say, okay, what descriptors do we have? If you haven't charged this person yet, does he have a sheet? Does he have a criminal record? And can you give me a rough age? What did you do with his car? Is it in the impound lot? I mean, I'd like to go to the impound lot and toss his car and pull out the insurance paper, figure out to get his address too. And set up outside the detachment. So when he gets released, because everybody gets released no matter what you do, even if it's murder, A, you got a picture of this character, and B, you can confront him. So that gets you started. But obviously the first thing you try to do if you had a rough age, try to run, John Barker or Jack Barker on CSO is going to be a humdinger, because there'll be, dozens and dozens of them. So, you're going to have a rough age, and you're going to have to, try and narrow it down until such time as he gets charged for the road rage incident, which you should be able to basically put him in the box for that. So that's what I have to say.
What's CSO, John?
Crime or Court Search Online. It's a BC government service which allows you to go online and basically look up cases where the accused party, has been named. You have to be very careful, because obviously, there are a lot of people with the same names, and of course, people use aliases too. But it takes a little practice, but you can get pretty good with it, and then you can see all their prior cases, how they resolved, whether they were found guilty or not guilty, whether they got a sentence, whether there are conditions. From my point of view, I mean, being an old dog, the most important thing is to get the file numbers. When you have the file numbers, you can actually pull the files. And every once in a while, you'll get lucky and you'll see the booking sheets in the files. And you'll see, if they're bail release documents, you might get a chance to look at those, and it'll sort of say, don't go near this address, and must stay at this particular location, and things like that. So even the old documents, because, criminals tend to return to the scene of the crime. So they'll go back to their old haunts, their old girlfriends, their old houses, and sometimes that's how you find them, by seeing either where they were told not to go or where they must stay.
I think we just got a glimpse into why you break so many stories, John. Anyways, hey, Farid, what I want to ask you about, from every once in a while, I mean, I'm a media lawyer too, as you are, and every once in a while we get the luxury of somebody asking us at an early stage what sort of things we might see down as legal pitfalls, as opposed to getting a call 10 minutes before news time. So, I mean, it's early stages, but are you seeing some legal concerns here?
Yeah, I think the biggest one for me at this point is the reliability of the tipster. He's right now, at least, we don't know very much about the person. They also seem to have a bit of a sketchy background. I wouldn't put too much stock, I guess, in what they've said. There's also the fact that they, don't seem willing to go on the record and stand behind what they're saying publicly. And so that's for sure the big concern. I would almost, just use that information for, I guess, what it is. It's just a tip, but not rely on it, because I think at this stage, it's not something that is helpful if ever this story has to be defended in court.
Yeah, good point. Okay, Vinny, let's see what's on our next slide.
So John was right. The reporter in this case has gone to Court Services Online, and we look up John Barker and we see that he has been charged for aggravated assault. Dan, I don't know if there's anything you want to add about this resource?
Only that, yeah, if people aren't aware of it, it's a terrific resource where you can search criminal matters, you can search civil cases, whether people have been, had named on either end of lawsuits and so forth, and it's a a good resource that saves you. You can let your sort of mouse do the walking at least to get started. So very, very useful. Okay, let's see what happens next, because we're in the information gathering stage, and that was one. So let's see what's next, Vinny.
Right, so this is the road rage story that John was referring to earlier. So there's been an incident on the Port Mann Bridge, and it is a big story. The reporter finds a citizen drone video online. You can see a little picture there. You have to consider, are there copyright or other legal issues for using the video? And you also attend the first court appearance. Bail is denied and the standard publication ban is ordered. That same video, the citizen drone video, is played in court. Does the publication ban prevent you from using it?
So Farid, maybe I'll come back to you again, because this raises some, right off the bat, a couple of legal questions to get sorted out. And maybe I'll go in reverse order. First of all, what is the standard bail ban, and would it stop you from playing this video? Oh.
The standard bail ban applies almost to every bail hearing. It's almost always requested by one of the parties involved, and it covers almost the entire hearing. So covers any evidence tendered, argument, information, and the judge's reasons, meaning there's really very little that can be published when you cover a bail hearing. It's kind of the outcome, the charges, conditions that might be imposed. So on this specific point, when you have a video that exists elsewhere and then is also tendered in court, it's a bit of a controversial issue, I think, in Canada. There's some conflicting case law on this, depending on which province you're in. I would say you can use it if you're in BC, but I would just be very careful to be quite clear that you have it from an independent source. I think if you do that, it's something that can be defended. If you're, in Saskatchewan, for example, I probably wouldn't say that because the case law is much worse. But in BC and some other provinces, I would be comfortable using it. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. That's usually the approach that I've taken here as well. And what about this when you're grabbing video off the internet or from the citizen? What's the status of that?
Yeah, and so obviously, the video taken by a citizen using their drone, they own that video. They have the copyright. It's their intellectual property. But there's this really great thing that I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, are familiar with, fair dealing, which allows the media to use other people's work without asking for permission and without paying. And so I think in a case like this, the criteria of fair dealing, essentially you need to show that what you want to use provides important information, helpful context, will help with your story. To me, it's quite clear that a video like this would. It would be used in the context of news, and it would provide a lot of really valuable information. A couple of key things that you always have to remember when you're using someone else's work. You always have to give credit. So you credit the person who owns it and where you found it, ideally both. And you can't just take a 5-minute video and put it on your website. It is called fair dealing, and so you have to be careful in what you choose. You know, the less you use is always going to be better. There's no magic formula, unfortunately.
We do have a, sorry to interrupt you. We did have a question that came in from Dave Barry. What if you found the video on Facebook?
The source doesn't, it doesn't matter.
Okay.
If you found it on Facebook, on YouTube, Reddit, it has no bearing on, you just have to credit it appropriately, but the analysis isn't really any different.
Okay, great. Well, we've got this story, which is kind of a convenient hook, I guess, to be working on a pretty good story, but also with a possible connection to this even bigger story. So about the Dunn. So in this case, I don't know if this would be, I'll ask Cassidy and John in a minute, but let's introduce the slide first, Vinny.
Sure. So as the reporter, you decide to contact the Dunn family and you contact them, but you don't quite share yet that you have a tip on who took Bobby. The Dunn parents are still seeking answers online. They feel like everyone's given up. And the original tips in 1999 claim to have seen somebody looking like Bobby around Sumas.
Okay, and let's just get a little more meat in the water here. Let's just introduce the next slide, and then I'm going to put some questions to our senior journalists here.
Oh, sorry to interrupt again.
Yeah.
I see that there's a Q&A box and a chat box, and I had missed the Q&A box.
Oh.
So there's two
Sure.
questions in there. Do fair dealing guidelines only apply for hard news? And then the second question is, in relation to fair dealing, my managing editor says it's best not to ask if we're allowed to use a video or photo, because if they say no, we can't use it at all. Is this true?
Yeah, Farid, want to field those?
Yeah, starting with the second question first, I would say that is a good practice, and I personally often give that advice quite often. Better not to ask and just say, I have a right to use this based on fair dealing. That said, I don't think it should really matter, but that's a maybe different legal debate. But I would say ideally, you either use fair dealing or go get a license or pay someone, but don't ask first and then use it later, because you might be inviting trouble. And then in response to the first question, I don't know if there's a distinct, I guess I don't fully know what hard news is, but I'd say I think news is understood quite broadly. And so,
I guess if it's a personal blog or something, would that be?
I could see a personal blog. I don't see why a personal blog would not be benefit from fair dealing, but it definitely would have to have as goal to inform people about whatever issue.
So the news category, I think the Supreme Court has interpreted all those categories of fair dealing pretty broadly, so you'd expect that. Okay.
And just, I did see that one other question that was asked in the Q&A about if it says copyright on the drone video. That doesn't matter either, because, unless something is specifically put in the public domain as free to use, everything is copyright. Every picture you see is probably going to be owned by somebody, whether or not it has the C on it. The C, I think, is just a way of saying this is copyrighted. But if you have a right to use it under the Copyright Act, which fair dealing falls under, the C isn't going to change anything.
It's a good little tip for people, because journalists are producers of important works, right? And it's a good tip to know, which is, you own your copyright from something you've created as a journalist, regardless of whether you put a warning on it. So you don't feel like you missed the boat if you didn't put a warning. The warning is a nice deterrent for people to maybe not overuse your stuff. Okay, so
Sorry, there's just one, and then
okay.
we'll just do this one more, and then we'll move on with our scenario. Does it matter if the photo or video comes from a closed or private group on Facebook?
No, it's that's just not something that enters the analysis. Once you have it, no matter how you got it, I would say the question is, do you meet the criteria? Is this news? Is it providing important information? Are you giving credit? And then you're good.
Right. Good.
Great.
I also, by the way, noticed a couple of raised hands in the thing. I'm going to ask anybody raising their hand to just type what you have to say right into the chat or your question, and that's how we'll get things on board. Okay, so just as we were talking about getting information, a reporter has decided to make a trip out to Sumas and see if he can, or she can, hunt down the where this John Barker lives, and finds out that he lives there with 2 sons. And has a nice excuse to go ask because of this road rage story. Cassidy, maybe you could weigh in a little bit. I'm curious about how you would approach this. I mean, you're going to be meeting these people for the first time if they're home, and like what kind of things do you have in mind? Is it just plow in and start asking, or do you soft pedal it, or what do you do?
I think honestly, even before heading down there, I'd have a conversation with the reporter, just because resources are such a realistic thing about the way we approach the job now. So it'd have to be, pretty much a guarantee, or I would want to have that conversation, a guarantee that they're going to get something from heading down there, because it is going to have a cost to it, and also a time element, which eats away at just in-house resources. But then once that's established, they're on their way down. I would have, I'd be looking more to slow play it, go for the road rage incident, use that as the entry point into engaging these people and having a conversation with them. But then through the conversation, maybe bring up some of the Bobby Dunn story as well. You could ask about the tip that we heard from the family, that this missing kid from BC was seen around in the Sumas area. Have you guys heard anything about that? And you could even, in your questioning, ask them or try to get a sense about the family dynamic there. Once you've met the family and the kids, just questions such as, so you guys are all from the same parents, correct? To try to tease out maybe what the family dynamic is there, and what they might reveal.
Okay, well, let's introduce the next slide, Vinny, and then I'm going to ask John about it, which is I think still out in Sumas.
Yeah, and we just have a comment from Claire, who says, how old are the kids? Is there a concern if they are minors? I guess it's a question for any of our panelists.
Yeah, well, I think I'll weigh in and just say it certainly is. You'd want to be approaching things quite differently if you're dealing with, somebody who wouldn't maybe appreciate the ramifications of talking to a reporter and so forth. In this case, well, I guess as we sort of revealed now on screen, we're not talking about minors, but it's a valid thing to consider. So, Vinny, why don't you introduce this slide, and we'll get John to weigh in on it.
So here they are. Here are the sons. Jeff and Josh Barker are there, and you asked them about their dad, and they said that they're worried about him. They say that he's a good man, but he just has a short fuse. The reporter shows them a photo of Bobby Dunn, saying that, tips back in 1999 said that they saw Bobby Dunn in the area. The sons say that they don't know anything. And the reporter gets a picture of them here.
So, John, what are you beyond what's on the screen? What are you thinking, and how are you approaching this thing?
Well, I mean, you got to try and get anything you can about the history of this family and what the kids know about it. And if the kid on the left is in fact Bobby Dunn, and he doesn't know it. I mean, how old was Bobby Dunn when he got scooped? He was at the P&E. I'm trying to remember how old he was. He was like, what, 5 or 6 years old?
Yeah, 5 or 6, and that was 22 years ago.
So, yeah, but still, I mean, you're going to know that you were abducted. Now, he may have been brainwashed. I'm thinking of, a number of kids. And who was that girl out in Port Moody who was in the tomb almost under a garage for many, many, many years, and she ended up being brainwashed to some extent. So ideally, I mean, to be honest with you, if you wanted to go for the brass ring, you'd try and get some DNA from the kid somehow, and that you might do that by tossing garbage. You may do that by giving them a drink or something. Invite them to lunch. See if you can get a water glass or something that you could throw in a plastic bag. Because let's face it, if you had this kid's DNA and you could match it to Bobby Dunn, wow, what a scoop. So, but other than that, I think, you're really trying to come up with some sort of way about the road rage incident. He's got a short fuse. Has he been involved in any kind of family violence? Has there been any concerns before? I don't know how you're going to wheedle that out of these guys, but I can't see any other way to go. And then I guess you're going to do the neighbors, and and then obviously the kid looks like he's of age, so you could probably see if he's got a sheet. Check him out on CSO.
So, and what about this? I mean, I've never used this, but we've seen stories over the last year or so of, some organizations that's like scrape the entire internet for photos and has a massive facial recognition business that apparently some police departments even used and then apologized for, that they shouldn't be doing that. And I mean, is that just too high tech, or is that
no? Actually, I had a woman on the radio show earlier who basically talked about how they had do age. You could do age progression, age regression. So you could take this photo and do age regression and see if it looks like Bobby Dunn, and then you could take the Bobby Dunn photo and move it up to 20 some odd years, 22 years later, and say, well, does this version now look like this kid in the hat on the left with the beard? And, that could be useful as a way of opening up that conversation with them again. But in and of itself, I don't think you could publish it.
Yeah.
We've had a few questions come in.
Sure, jump in.
Margot had just commented that, something, the same thing, to run facial aging technology to see if there's a match. Somebody asked a question about safety measures. When you do go to the house, sounds potentially dangerous. What safety measures would you advise a reporter take before going to the house?
Yeah, do you have some thoughts on that, Cassidy?
Ideally he'd be there with a photographer as well. The reporter would be, so usually just working in tandem with someone else offers a level of protection or just a sense of safety, and just the basic approach to it that reporters would do, just keeping distance and just kind of reading the scene and acting accordingly.
Okay.
And letting the city desk know where they are, letting the newsroom know where they are, obviously.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on and talk about the question about going to police. Like, you got a bit of information now, and we talked earlier about there might be some point where you need to do that, or you decide that's a good idea. Maybe John, can you? What's your sort of barometer on something like this, in terms of at what point you might think it either important, because journalists are citizens too, or also important to your story to bring your story along by getting police involved?
I think after I went to Sumas and I saw this guy who could possibly be Bobby Dunn, I think I'd be phoning you because I want to know whether I have any guilty knowledge. I want to know whether or not I'm going to get jammed up for, not passing something along. And assuming that I'm not, and you give me the green light to continue investigating it, then I'm going to start to find, I mean, ideally, you're going to try and find the retired cop who initially worked on this file. But, you know, absent of that, you're going to say, who's the file officer now? You know, who does your historical kidnappings? And work it backwards and basically say, you know, I may have a tip that could be useful to you, but I don't want to get burned, because the problem in this situation is, you know, they get your information, they don't give you any information, and then they hold a news conference and they try and blow it out the door. You know, I mean, I've had that happen to me. I've actually had the cops deny the story and then call a news conference the next day to announce it. I'm serious. So, you know, you don't want to get ripped by the cops, but you don't want to be a bad guy either. And, you know, if it really is Bobby Dunn and you have a true and honest belief that it is, you've got a serious ethical dilemma, because, you know, you owe it to Bobby Dunn and to his parents and to society to basically get that properly investigated, so that, you know, you know or you don't know. And, you know, obviously at some point you're going to have to tell the cops.
And Farid, this might be an unfair question because it's pretty situational, but is there some tipping point where there's kind of an obligation to go to police, or is it always a judgment call in every case?
I would say legally, I don't think there ever is an obligation to go to the police, maybe with the exception of child protection, but actual children, or, you know, you don't have to report crimes or your knowledge of crimes. I think there could also be a risk in terms of personal, you know, you have to manage your own independence and integrity too. But legally, no, I'd say it's purely an ethical question, and where, you know, how you decide what to do. Yeah.
Okay. Now, Vinny, why don't we walk through the pieces of this, going to the police, and then we'll take it the next step.
Yep. So as a reporter, you decide to share the information with police. And John talked a little bit about the pros and cons of that. You explained what you were told without identifying the source. The police says that they will investigate and they'll alert you to any major developments in the story. The police asks the reporter not to publish anything for now. Would you agree to that?
So I'm going to ask Cassidy about this one. I don't know if you've been in that situation before. It doesn't happen very often, but occasionally you do get a situation where police ask media to hang back on a story because of any number of reasons. What's your take on that?
Yeah, it's been a while since I've been in that situation. Where I'm sitting now would actually be it would depend on who the reporter is, I think. So if you have a John Daly or another big name crime reporter like a Kim Boland, and they have an established relationship with the police officer or officers who they are dealing with, and they have a trust, that in that relationship with them, I would, you feel safer maybe not or agreeing not to publish. But then the trade-off would be that you get the scoop the next day, or whenever they decide to go. If it's another reporter, maybe a GA who's just been pulled into this story who doesn't have that relationship, then I would be a little more hesitant, or like the conversation would just be a different one, I think, in terms of agreeing to or not. Generally, I don't really like agreeing to conditions put by anyone, including the police, but it's always a bit of a give and take. So it's kind of depends on really the circumstances and who the reporter is.
Yeah, in my experience, mercifully, it's a very rare request like that. At least from where I sit. So that gives you a little bit of confidence that it's not a well that the police go to very often. But I do remember things. I remember even the media were in a big debate when the Graham McMinn kidnapping happened out at UBC, for example, and there was a concern about agitating the kidnappers and harm, and even between media couldn't agree. So it's not like there's an easy answer to these questions. It's worth thinking about. Okay, we're going to move on to introduce the next slide about considering breaking the story. I'm just going to lay out some stuff, and we'll get it introduced by Vinny, and then I'm going to, whoops, hang on, don't look. Get it introduced by Vinny, and then I'm going to ask Farid to give us some advice.
All right, so you are considering breaking the story. You have to weigh the legal concerns. For the kidnapping story, you could be defaming John Barker. You could be traumatizing the Dunn family and the Barker sons if you're wrong. And what could a story like this affect? How could a story like this affect the police investigation? And could it affect the fairness of the current assault trial against Barker?
There's a whole bunch there, Farid, but sometimes these problems come in layers like that, don't they?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I guess taking the first bullet, starting with the first bullet, and the second part, the trauma to the Dunn family and Barker sons, I would say that's a purely ethical editorial question. There's no realistic way in which they could then, sue a media outlet for that, unless the intention of publishing is to cause trauma, which it's never going to be if you're a responsible journalist. Defaming John Barker is for sure top of mind and a really big concern for me. At this stage, really the only evidence we have is the anonymous source, who, and that's the status of that source is a bit nebulous. They seem to even want to be confidential. And so they're not a source or they're potentially not a source who's ever going to be able to help us in court, meaning we don't have any real evidence that John Barker kidnapped the Dunn boy. We haven't spoken with John Barker yet. And so that arguably takes off, the main defense we'd rely on, responsible communication, off the table. And it really means that we just have to be right about what we're publishing, but we just don't have enough, I don't think, at this stage to really say that. And so that's my biggest concern. It's defaming John Barker and just not having enough evidence right now.
Right.
On the second point, could a story affect the police investigation? Maybe, but I don't think that's a legal concern either. I would not be at all concerned with that. I think it's purely ethical. And, the police might say that and maybe often do say that, but I think in the absence of something specific and a specific reason why it would affect the police investigation, I think that has to be taken with a grain of salt, because arguably it could positively affect the police investigation, which clearly hasn't gone anywhere for 20 odd years. And then, on the final point, the fairness of the Barker assault trial, I'm assuming, given that we're in BC, that the Barker assault trial is not happening anytime soon. He was just arrested in the last few weeks. And so I'm not concerned at all on that front. Courts have recognized that potential jury members and people who consume media forget it very quickly. And so I think the risk of affecting trial fairness and not being able to find jury members, assuming it is a jury trial, is very, very low. And it'll be quite easy down the road for a court to find a jury. So I wouldn't be concerned at this stage. Maybe if the trial was in a month or even 2 months, my answer would be different. But right now, I don't think we should worry about that.
Okay.
We have a couple of questions come in. Dan, do you want to do them now, or do you want to?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay. So this one's more of a comment, so I'll just skip that. If you have comments, please type them into the public chat so you guys can chat amongst each other and we can see our comments as well. In the Q&A, we have a question: how much do journalists get scrutinized when the police get involved? Are they compelled or forced to reveal sources? How much does the organization that the reporter is working for back them up on such cases?
Okay, so a couple of things there. One is on the revealing of sources, we're going to be getting in a few slides to something touches on that. So I think we'll maybe park that question just for a bit so we don't reveal that piece of it too early. And with respect, and I think, okay.
Yeah, if we're going to probably get to that question in a few slides. Just a couple more questions. If the reporter had two anonymous sources saying Barker kidnapped the boy, would that change things? Not sure who that would go to, but
Yeah, go ahead, Farid.
Yeah, I think it probably would. It doesn't act well if they're both confidential sources and sources who were saying we will never reveal. Were we even willing to go to jail over this? It doesn't really change what we have to present in court. But I think from a risk management perspective, assuming that second source is good and we feel comfortable with it, it's probably true. And so it's quite unlikely to lead to a lawsuit if this is Bobby Dunn. That's how I would see a second anonymous source helping. It could corroborate what the first source says, and that's always much, much better. So I think it would reduce the risk quite a bit.
Okay, let's move it along here. Just keep it going. We've got, let's introduce this one. Vinny?
Yeah, so you decide to pay a visit to jail, and you apply to visit Barker in custody, and Barker accepts. And here's Dan, do you want to go into the visiting policy?
Yeah, well, just to let people know that there are policies by which you can arrange or try to arrange various visits and so forth. I think John, you've had the experience of going to try to talk to an inmate, and I don't imagine they let you take cameras in there, do they?
Well, they didn't want us to bring a camera in. I was with editor, microvan operator Jamie Forsyth, and we went to see one of the so-called Stanley Park Six, one of the guys who allegedly got tuned up by the VPD and was thrown in a paddy wagon. He was a, sort of like low-level, low-life criminal from Granville Mall. And I guess they were having some problems at a convenience store, and he got grabbed up. But anyway, they drove them around, took them out to the P&E, took off their shoes, and they took them to the middle of Stanley Park into some parking lot. And as they got out, they got thumped, or so they said. It turns out that some of them did get thumped. But anyway, the bottom line was this guy was at pretrial in Poco, and we essentially talked our way in there, and they said, well, you can't take any video. And so Jamie said, can we take some still pictures? And oddly enough, they said yes. So we shot like a 30 or 40 still pictures of this guy, behind, through the interview room glass, because, in theory, if you're in pretrial, you're innocent until proven guilty. And you've got a right to speak, and you've got a right to be visited, and so forth. So anyway, the guy pulls up his legs, and he's showing all of his wounds and his bad ribs, and his cuts and bruises and all that kind of stuff. And we did record the audio of him talking to us through this gadget system, and we knocked it together and made a story out of it. It can be done, but it's
doesn't happen very often, but
no.
I just thought it'd be useful for people to kind of be aware that there's an option there, at least a possibility.
Yeah.
Okay. So talking to him, just to get a little bit more information on maybe we can introduce this one, Vinny.
Yeah, so you get talking to John Barker. You ask about the incident on the Portman Bridge, and you ask him if he has any kids, and he mentions his sons, and he's worried about them. Then you ask if you remember any Bobby Dunn sightings around Sumas. And he actually, it's not popping up on the screen. Oh, there it is. So he yells guard and then angrily ends the interview.
Oh, that's tantalizing.
Mm-hmm.
It struck a nerve maybe. Okay, let's see what happens next here. So the family is still part of this thing. And so Cassidy, maybe you can weigh in a little bit on you've got this thing where you've got a bunch of information. still wondering about the reliability and but talking to the family, and maybe that's a source. How do you manage that?
I would stay away from talking at this point. I'd still probably stay away from talking about the tipster and what we're looking at, just out of sensitivity to the family, because we don't have anything firm. You want to be sensitive to them, don't want to upset them, re-traumatize them, or cause them any unnecessary grief. Having said that, I think I would consider keeping in touch with them and potentially talking about doing like an anniversary story or a cold case story with them, just to create that level of trust and create that relationship should something develop further on the actual tip.
Okay, well, the reporter approaches it similar to what you're talking about, not so much to tell so much, but just find out if the family knows anymore to help the investigation. Vinny, can you help introduce these ones?
Yeah, so you go back to the family and they say that the police have told them that they're investigating the theory that Jesse Barker of Sumas is Bobby Dunn. So they demand to know everything that you know. Do you tell them? Do you reveal?
So Cassidy, you were just saying you probably would not so much reveal what the source has told you at this stage, at least maybe not quite yet. But there's a little bit of information that they're providing to you, and I I've seen this dynamic, for example, during Picton, where the police will sometimes be telling the families more than they are telling the rest of the world, and then sometimes those families don't keep it to themselves. So the police have actually let them know that they're actually onto this Jesse Barker in Sumas. So I don't know if John or Cassidy, whether that kind of increases the urgency of the story or what?
I would probably break the story now in some form. I think naming Jesse Barker would be a consideration. Likely not to do it, but I would aim to publish a story based on the family saying that the police are investigating a theory that someone is involved in their missing son.
Right. Okay. Oh. John, thought on that?
Yeah, I think your risk of the story breaking if the police are already telling the family, because the police, as you pointed out, know damn well that the families tend to leak stuff, at least to their friends and relatives, if not to the media directly. So let's answer the second question. They demand to know all that I know, and do I reveal it? I think I would say to them, yeah, I got a tip. This was the tip. There's a guy who worked with this guy at the P&E a long time ago. He says that it's just it's Barker, and that is basically I think I'd say, but I'm gonna. The reason I haven't told you to this point is I needed to go see him in prison, and when I put it to him point blank that maybe he was the kidnapper, or he's connected in some way to the Bobby Dunn case. He was, boom, guard, I'm on the door, let me out of here, I'm not talking to this jerk anymore. So I think at that point, you've got to give them something in exchange for hoping that they're not going to give it to some other media outlet like the Sun.
Sorry to all the Sun people on the line here, but and Cassidy too. So, but I know what you mean.
That's why I said that.
It remains a healthily competitive industry. Okay, so let's see what's next here. And here's a reality. Introduce this one for us, Vinny,
yeah,
please.
you're losing control of the story. The family scooped you on Twitter. They say that I guess it's an account for Find Bobby. And it says Bobby Dunn is alive and in Sumas, BC. Might go by last name Barker. Please, please, please provide info ASAP.
Okay, so Cassidy and John, you were both of a mind that you're pretty much at the edge of breaking a story, and I I guess at this point you're even more so. I'm seeing you nodding here. So let's just take it to the next and see what happens. What happens now? And I mean, I guess this is a reality in the social media era, right? Where, you know, you got a story and boom, somebody decides to, one of your sources decides to tweet it up themselves. Okay, and it puts emergency on the police too. So Vinny, introduce this one for us.
Yeah, so now not only do you lose control of the story on Twitter, the police start to move in. And because the family went public, it makes it very urgent. So the police takes Jesse in for questioning and forensics. The police source also tells you that John Barker is being charged for the kidnapping, and a press conference and first court appearance are both scheduled for the following day. So the whole world's going to know tomorrow.
Okay, well, I'd be interested in hearing from all three panelists actually what we've got now, and you know, if you're contemplating all of these developments breaking the story, I mean, you know, how are you doing it? What are you saying? Are you breaking it completely, or are you know, doing a story that's going to shake more out? What do you? So maybe just go down the list. Cassidy, what are your thoughts now?
I'd be looking to publish a story. One of the first questions I would have, again, is going back to that police source. How reliable is that? And again, depending on who the reporter is, if we're confident enough, you could build a story around. We have learned that arrest is going to be made in relation to the kidnapping. I would be hesitant. Well, I wouldn't recommend at all publishing anything naming him until the charges have actually been laid and it's in CSO, or we've seen. I mean, I wouldn't go just on the police saying he will be charged.
Right. John?
Well, I mean, if the guy if he's been arrested, and, you know, the kid is in the jug for interview and forensics, you know, I mean, I'd probably say that he was arrested in connection with the disappearance of Bobby Dunn. I might avoid the word kidnapping because, you know, really, as I think about it, it was really the guy who sold little Bobby Dunn to Barker who is the kidnapper. And you know, the cops have missed him and he's dead now.
And that could be, yeah.
So.
Well, and sometimes, you know, like.
I'd break the story right away. Because, you know, this ain't going to hold one way or the other. And if they brought him in and then they kick him loose, that's an even more interesting story.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that sometimes happens that sort of you both identified here is, you know, somebody gets taken in by police or questioned by police, or police execute a search warrant in somebody's house and you happen to be filming it, or, you know, and yet you don't know if there's charges. You don't know if they are going to, and so you got to be a bit cautious about language. Do you have some thoughts there, Farid, about how you would describe that without sort of overstating it to the point of defamation?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with John and Cassidy that you know, there have where I think media isn't told so is going to be charged tomorrow with X, and then they were charged with Y, or there was some change, and you know, I think we've ended up in some hot water before.
Well, they don't get charged at all.
Exactly. I think Cassidy's solution is quite elegant. You know, you can wait to name the person who's being charged until you've got that piece of paper. Because if you're not naming anyone, there's no one's being defamed, and so that's always helpful. Yeah.
What about this? What about using that Zoom video or some part of it that you got right at the beginning? I mean, you said you wouldn't identify the person, but I mean, they're anonymous on screen. Their voice has been altered. But I mean, is there some piece of that you would use in breaking, or would you kind of hang that back for the bigger story? I don't know. Any thoughts on that, Cassidy?
I would probably lean towards not using that, but I would ask for legal advice.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, sometimes, there's the breaking story, then there's the bigger story later on. So maybe we'll talk about that.
There's a couple of questions that came in.
Yes, please.
Mark Nielsen asked about using the language, how about on suspicion kidnapping? Would that get you out of defamation? I don't know.
I've always thought that on that kind of thing, like it's like allegedly or suspicion. If the police are actually saying we suspect him of, he's our suspect, or, then you're there. But I've quite often stuck with tracking the language of how the police are describing it pretty closely as a way of ensuring that what I'm reporting is an accurate state of where the police situation is at. Farid, is that approach you take?
Yeah.
So that's a good approach. If the police haven't said on suspicion of kidnapping, then I wouldn't say on suspicion of kidnapping. But
And then the second question that's here, it's related to the anonymous source. What if the anonymous source is malicious, trying to harm the Barkers? How do you get a sense of their motivation?
Yeah, John or Cassidy, either one of you want to weigh in on what spider sense you apply to such a situation?
It would definitely be something that would be on my mind. Excuse me. And it would be a challenge if that was the only conversation that we did have. If you could get like another phone call, or ideally a face-to-face, that's how you'd really, in my mind, try to get a better sense of what they might be up to. And then you could ask them as well, what is your motivation now for doing this?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty scary because the guy very well, could be covering up something. I mean, we know he basically says he's a criminal, that he was involved in criminal activity with Barker. And, he hasn't heard from him in 20 years. Well, I saw it on the news. It's a great story. But yeah, you don't know what his motivation is. And maybe you have to make that clear if you do decide to break the story in some fashion, using careful words and everything. But I would use some of that, video with the blacked out person and the distorted audio, but I'd cut it very carefully so that he doesn't say that this guy absolutely, kidnapped this child. And then basically say, this guy called when he saw this incident on the bridge, which was a road rage incident. And the person who is charged in that road rage incident is so-and-so.
Yeah.
And now this person is allegedly in custody and under investigation in connection with the disappearance, the mysterious disappearance of poor Bobby Dunn.
Maybe there's a list of questions instead of allegations.
Yeah.
Anyways, okay, so I'm gonna move on, and what I'd like to do is put up a couple of questions about the breaking of the story, and this one is gonna really be for Farid. But introduce the slide, Vinny, and then I'm going to turn it over to Farid to kind of explain a bit of the law on this.
Yeah. So you decide to break the story. Can you ID Jesse? You are the only one who has the photo. Criminal Code 486 Section 3 creates a ban on sex crime victim identities. It also includes a lot more other sections and other crimes. If an accused is charged with an offense there's many listed, but it doesn't include kidnapping. It includes human trafficking or hostage, but not specifically kidnapping.
Farid, can you break that down in terms of ID issues and what to watch for?
Yeah, I think the general rule in Canada is that you can identify victims. There's only very rarely an automatic ban over the identity of victims. When it's a young victim of a young offender, that's a really good example of where you can never name them, or essentially never. So in this case, and even that criminal code provision that's before us, there is that ban, but it has to be ordered and it has to be asked for. When it's asked for, it is in effect. There's not a lot of room to argue. And so because Jesse is a alleged kidnapping victim, does not fall under this section of the criminal code, nor does he fall under any other ban that exists. I would say you can name him. The only potential issue, I guess, is, well, in theory, a ban can be asked over anything. And so perhaps one would be asked over his identity. It's always possible, but really at this point, at least with the information we have, I think it's more of an ethical editorial question.
The issuing of discretionary bans and bans on victims, discretionary ones, do happen from time to time, and it's a real tension, I find, because the resources are such that journalists can't be courtrooms at all times, and bans happen, and there's this sort of magical assumption that everybody just knows it and has to obey it with criminal consequences. So one of the things that I've noticed is that that's an area where the kind of, despite being competitors, the camaraderie amongst journalists, kind of letting each other know, keeping each other safe is a big deal. And it's worth celebrating and making sure that happens, because you walk into something, somebody was there 5 minutes earlier and heard something and lets you know, and thank you very much. So okay, let's move on and see. Well, we're going to do a Zoom poll. This is to do with the photo. I want to get people's news. Maybe I'll get you to introduce the slide, Vinny, and then I'll run the poll. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, you're about to break the story. There's still a decision whether to publish Jesse's photo. So you have a few choices. A, I would publish his photo. B, I would not yet publish his photo. And C, I would charge others a fee for his photo.
Okay, let's run a poll on that and see what people say. I'll give you 45 seconds or so. Oh, and the votes are coming in hot and heavy. Okay, I'll give it another 10 seconds.
We had a couple of questions come in during the poll. Do you want to go over the poll results and then we'll get to
those?
Or?
Maybe I'll put them on screen in a moment, Vinny, and then we'll do the questions while the results are on screen.
Okay.
Okay, here we go. Look at that. We have nobody's going to go sell the photo. I can't believe it. That was kind of having fun with that one, but a pretty close split between using it and not using it, and that is a tough decision. But why don't you lay out the questions there, Vinny, and we can open it up to our panelists.
Yeah. So somebody said that there is qualified privilege that protects reporters when reporting allegations in court. Are we not afforded the same protection when using police information in stories? And if so, if we repeat what the police say, that he's suspected of kidnapping before the charges are laid, are we safe from legal trouble if someone decides to sue for defamation?
That's a good question, Farid. I got to make you answer it because it's actually, there is a difference between what's in court and what police just say, and sometimes police don't necessarily say what's legal, but yeah, but also generally it's usually pretty safe, but maybe not.
Yeah, I think that's essentially what I was going to say, that I would say, say that specific fact or statement in the question, police suspect or have a suspect, and they've identified John Barker as a suspect in this case. That's not the same thing as saying he did it. And it is a fact that presumably that he is their suspect. So I think it's not, probably the defense that applies isn't the court reporting defense. but I do still think that that would be defendable. And, you know, maybe not without risk at all. And I'd certainly be careful, and I probably wouldn't repeat everything, you know, that is said. You know, I think some scrutiny is probably warranted, but something like that example, I think is probably defendable. Yeah. Yeah.
Probably a good time, at least I've found in over the years, that sometimes that's a good time to, you know, to add some caveat language about at this point, and not just no charges have been laid yet, like it sounds like it's going to happen tomorrow, but, you know, no allegation of wrongdoing has yet been leveled against him, and the matter is still under consideration, or words to that effect.
Yeah, and if I could just throw one more point out there, in my experience, you know, that specific issue, identifying a suspect, is a big, you know, it's a big conversation that's had in the newsroom, and it's a big editorial question, because there's a recognition that that's a pretty big deal, and it could really, you know, it does impact a person's reputation in a big way if they are never charged. And so there's that ethical side of it too.
Okay, so Cassidy and John, before we take the poll results off the screen, what would you guys do? Would you include his photo in the story or not?
Yeah, he's an adult. Sorry, go ahead, Cassidy.
No, yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I think you run the photo. You know, you have to say it's still undetermined whether, you know, whether there are tests or whether he's actually you know, a little kid who went missing. But you know, if he's been brought in for an interview and done some forensics, and I think you put it in context. You say, you know, this is kind of a bizarre story that you know, came from a tipster, and the family itself says that the police were investigating the same information that the tipster gave me. Or apparently it seems to be the same information. And, you know, this is the kid. And I went and talked to him, and I asked him if he knew Little Dunn, and he had heard anything about that. He said he didn't know. So if it is him, he doesn't even know who he is.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. A thought that occurred to me was, you know, police had taken him in. So is he still with police, or is he at home in Sumas and about to be descended on by paparazzi? And, you know, you think about those kind of aspects too.
Hidden camera.
Yeah, well, maybe. Okay. Anyways, we could, I have no doubt we could have a lot of interesting points of view on that. I just need to get rid of the poll, and we're going to move on to the next piece of it. And here is, I'm going to put up the breaking news story, and I'm going to get Farid to be the pre-publication advisor. Maybe it's a bit of a long one, so if you can introduce it there, Vinny, and then we'll
This is the breaking news story. Bobby Dunn found, Sumas man charged with kidnapping. Exclusive. Bobby Dunn's parents never gave up hope. Their son disappeared from the peony in August 1999. He has now been found living under a different name, Jesse Barker, where he calls his alleged kidnapper Dad. John Barker, 60, has been charged with kidnapping. He makes his first appearance in court tomorrow. He was in custody following an alleged assault on the Portman Bridge. Betty and Bob Dunn say they are both overjoyed and apprehensive. They have yet to meet their son, now 27, and have been told by police he insists Barker is his only real father.
So Farid, does it pass the lawyer pre-pub test?
I would say no. You know, for a story like this, and it was just alluded to in that question I had answered earlier, you know, the main defense that I'd want to have is there's now a court proceeding against John Barker. He's been charged, and, you know, here are the details. And I think most of these kind of sentences and facts that are in this story could probably fit in to that defense, with a couple of exceptions. And so what I don't like about this story is that, you know, the headline, Bobby Dunn found, it assumes that Jesse Barker is Bobby Dunn, when we know that, you know, there's a court process that's just about to unfold. And so, you know, that is not a proven fact in a courtroom. You and there are a couple of similar references. He's now been found living under a different name. The opening sentence, I find, I have no issue with including the Dunn parents' sentiments and feelings, but I don't know if I would put that as the lead, because again, it puts a certain framing on the story that I think is, this kid, or Jesse, is Bobby Dunn. That is a scientific fact that we know of, and that's why their parents are so happy. And so those are, I'd say those would be my high level comments on the story. It's just too definitive and matter of fact about what we know.
Right. It needs to be a little more emphatic about we're at the very beginning of a process where charges have been laid, but findings haven't been made or something. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, very valid points. Okay, let's, we're getting close to our time here, so I want to make sure we catch the last couple of slides. And this is also for you, primarily Farid. Maybe Vinny can introduce it and Farid can comment.
Yeah, so the police see your story and they immediately want all your notes and interviews. They serve a production order. How do you respond? And there's a note here that says the Journalist Source Protection Act might protect the original source's email and information.
Yeah, so the Journalist Source Protection Act is a pretty relatively new legislation in Canada. It was passed in 2017 or 2018, I think. And, it's essentially expanded the protection afforded to journalists and their sources in a couple of different contexts. But really, the important thing to keep in mind is that it's a federal law. So it applies to criminal cases and anything governed by federal law, but not, provincial law or civil provincial law. In this case, the production order is probably over, the interviews done with the accused, his son, and the source. The onus is on, once you are able to say, I'm a journalist and these are journalistic sources, the onus is then on the police or the Crown to explain to a judge why it's so important to get this information. And there are two things that they essentially have to show. One is there's no other way to get the information, so there aren't any other sources. And it's so important to get this information that the journalist's right to privacy, it warrants invading the journalist's right to privacy. And so, the media is given an opportunity to say, no, that's not the case. And so this production order should be quashed. I think in this case, there are a few different things that would favor that kind of a finding, as is, in that third bullet, it mentions the fact that there's a, potential confidential source. I think courts recognize the importance of confidential sources and don't want them to dry up. Because if you think about this whole story, without that original source, there would be no charges. That's what led to everything here. So there's a lot of value in respecting that. But it's possible that a court would say, no, it's so important that, the police needs that interview for whatever reason. But I would say you would have a very good defense to, or it'd be something we could reasonably oppose. Even the other interviews and notes that are sought, I think there's a good argument that there's nothing there that the police really need. We know that the entire conversation with the son was just, a couple lines about his father, and that's it. There's not that much, there's no proof of a criminal act there. And kind of similarly with the accused here, it's not like he admits or that he committed a crime or anything like that. As soon as Bobby Dunn was mentioned, the conversation was over. It's another area where you could say, well, is there really that much value to giving this to the police, considering it involves intruding on the journalist's right to their privacy and to kind of preserve their work product? But that would be essentially the kind of gist of how that all works.
And if you do make an objection, then essentially it gets in front of a judge and argue it out, I guess.
We'd hire Dan Burnett.
Or somebody. Okay, good stuff. Let's got two more slides, I think, and we're running low on time.
Dan,
so
we have quite a few questions that have
okay. Let's
come in. Do we want to address that at the end, or do you want to?
No, go ahead now.
Okay. There's a question from before on how you would find out whether there's a publication ban in effect if no other journalists are covering the case. Is that a?
That's actually I can weigh in on that a little bit. One is, you can ask the court website does have a under media and publication stuff. There's in BC you can actually search by case name or number, and it'll tell you most publication bans that are in place. It isn't perfect, but it's certainly better than not knowing anything. And having done so would be a good bit of due diligence. Finding out who the Crown or the defense lawyer is, and calling them or going to the court registry. Occasionally, somebody won't talk to media, but they'll have to get somebody like me or Farid to call the Crown, and they'll tell. And you'll find out, is there a ban? Yes. What is it? Oh, well, it's just your basic bail hearing ban and nothing more. And then it's there.
Mm-hmm. Another person asked that if there were errors or if the Barker was not charged later, and then he sued for defamation, could the responsible communication defense help you in this case?
Well, I think Farid's points were pretty key on that, which is, a lot of it depends on, if you handled that story the right way and didn't overstate beyond what you had pretty diligently obtained, right? So, like if a police officer at a briefing said, we are investigating him as the possible kidnapper, and then there was a suit about that, and that turned out to not be. Well, it wouldn't be. It's if they're investigating, right? So that part would be true, and you'd be, I think, probably held pretty responsible to take that as true that they're investigating, as long as you're not overstating beyond that, I would think.
Has there been any media outlet that's successfully defended a reporter since the passing of the Journalist Source Protection Act?
Yes, Farid will know all, I'm sure, more about me, but there's quite quickly one of the cases went right to the Supreme Court of Canada called Denis and Cote about a Quebec proceeding trying to get a hold of a leak of some government secrets, and the Supreme Court of Canada was very aggressive in interpreting the Journalist Source Protection Act. Even going so far as to saying that requiring a journalist to out their source is only to occur as a last resort, was the language the Supreme Court of Canada used. So that's a pretty good victory. I don't know if there's anything to add on that, Farid, or whether that sort of sums it up in a admittedly brief way, but highlights it.
And I'll put a link in the chat to an article about the case, because there's a lot written about it.
Okay, let's move to the civil lawsuit that's now been filed, and maybe you can introduce that slide, Vinny. And I know we're a little bit over time here. Hopefully everyone's good for another 5 minutes. There's only one slide after this one, brief wrap up, and
so there's a civil lawsuit.
Okay.
The Duns call a news conference and they file a civil suit against John Barker for damages. It alleges that Barker was brainwashing Bobby Dunn. Is it okay to quote the court document, and how do you get the other side of the story? And another thing is that the news story goes international and your photo is used without permission by other media. Can they do that, and what do you do?
Maybe I'll start by asking Cassidy or John if they have thoughts about the last point, which is the issue of other media grabbing your stuff. I mean, it hopefully, well, I mean, it would happen from time to time occasionally, but how much of a reality is that in the industry, and how much of annoyance or just that's the way it is situation, is it?
It's fairly rare, I think, in our shop at least. It has happened, especially with crime stories. So it shouldn't, for one thing, without permission. And if they do get permission, then it has to be credited, at least from my point of view. And there's nothing really wrong with that, especially it can create goodwill if we're talking about kind of having collegiality between competition that can lead to favors going down the road, sometimes getting images that you need on another story. That's happened as well. But there should be permission and then credited.
Yeah. I've always taken the view that fair dealing really isn't going to help you very much if you're grabbing a competitor's material, because that really is going to the heart of unfairness in terms of use. John, any other thoughts on that, or is that pretty much covered?
I would agree with Cassidy. It's fairly rare, So yeah, I would say they can't do it, and if they do it, you call Dan Burnett or Farid and sort of like say, hey, what can we do? Can we get an injunction or sue them or demand payment?
Yeah, but I think it generally is pretty good. On the middle bullet point there, I got to ask Farid about this. Talk about quoting. There's a pretty juicy quote in the court document in the civil lawsuit saying Barker brainwashed the boy. Where does that stand in terms of being able to quote that, and is there some obligation to balance it off or what?
Yeah, the beauty, I think, of court reporting is that there's a lot of latitude if you are fair and accurate, and often that means that you get quotes or get to quote allegations which are very colorful and interesting. The rule just is be fair, be accurate. If there's a response from the other side, in a case like this, there's going to be a notice of action or a statement of claim filed probably within a few weeks, though there will be a response or a statement of defense. If you've got both of those, well, you can't just quote from the statement of claim. You balance it out by bringing in any other documents which might answer. And then, of course, another way is to always, ask the person. So, if the statement of claim is filed on the Monday and you want to do a story right away, well, it's only fair, I think, to go to the defendant who hasn't yet had a chance to defend and have something from them too. But it is a very good defense that's available to the media when we're reporting on court documents.
Yeah, good. Okay, final slide. Vinny.
Yeah, so do you decide to put backstory, the original interview that you had with the anonymous source? And what are the legal impediments for doing so?
So I guess I'm curious, maybe as a final from all three, a story like this sort of, at least in my mind, kind of cries out for, or as a possibility of a story about how the story arose piece. But I'm also kind of mindful of, we've still got a criminal case going on that you are trying to avoid prejudicing, if that's a problem. But maybe just down the list or up the list, John, and then Farid, and then Cassidy.
Absolutely, you want to publish that backstory. You want to run the Zoom interview with the anonymous source. You want to run the aerial footage of the incident on the bridge. And the only legal impediment is if the trial is really coming up very, very soon. So I don't think that in British Columbia, as we know, it can take many, many years before you get tried for murder or kidnapping. And so I'd say just go for it, just open fire.
Farid, your last thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's a risk management question, and I think it's something that could be done in a defendable way. One thing about broadcasting the Zoom interview is that if this source is, if there's an understanding of confidentiality there, and you're broadcasting their voice, there's a risk that you're violating that, contract you might have with the source. So I would for sure be careful there. But then otherwise, Barker's been charged. We've got some more indications that support the story and the advance by the source. So I think from a defamation perspective, we're in better shape than we were.
Great. And Cassidy?
Yes, consider if possible, maybe writing it as a narrative, maybe a first person, and you can get at those kind of themes, maybe of motivation. Might be tricky legally with that, but just kind of maybe a think piece narrative. This is how it played out, and this is what it looked like.
And Vinny, is there a person on chat or Q&A who has a last word or a last question there before we do a little wrap up?
I think that we've probably covered all the most relevant questions. There's sort of some leftover questions that aren't relevant to the last slide here.
Okay, fair enough. That's fine. There's lots of good chat. So that'll bring us to the end of the scenario. I've had a lot of fun with throwing questions at people, and we've got some great nuggets have come out. But we can wrap it up there. And I mentioned Vinny and or Janet might have a couple of words.
Yeah, so I just want to thank everybody for your questions. I know that there are a couple that we didn't get to because of time, but I also want to thank our panelists for sharing their expertise with us. And this is an annual event that we do, so we do want to get your feedback. We will be sending a link to a survey to all the participants. So we'd really appreciate it if you could let us know what worked, what ideas for the future, how it could be improved. And now I'd like to give the last word to Janet, who will give the closing remarks.
Again, on behalf of the Jack Webster Foundation, thank you, panelists. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in, logging in, near and far. It is an honor and a privilege to be able to provide this. And again, it's made possible by the generosity of our panelists and our chief ringleader tonight, Dan. So thank you so much. Stand by for that survey that you will see. As it was mentioned before, it's the first time that we've done this online. And so we really would like your feedback for sure. One other thing to keep in mind, hey, journalists out there, call for submissions for the Webster Awards will open mid-May, and you're going to have until the end of July to put your submissions in. Stand by. We have some new categories this year and some new tweaks and changes as well. So read carefully. We'll announce when the call is open, and you'll have to check out the website. We look forward to honoring excellence in journalism across the province again this year. Thanks and good night.
And I'll just add this as a thanks to the panelists, Cassidy, John, Farid, so great, and also shout out to Mashal, who not only was the journalist who got the first interview right at the beginning there, but also has been running our tech for this webinar all evening. So thank you very much, Mashal.